Once upon a time there was a very little dog, and his name was Rover. He was very small and very young, or he would have known better, and he was very happy playing in the garden in the sunshine with a yellow ball, or he would never have done what he did. Not every old man with ragged trousers is a bad old man. Some are bone and bottle men and have little dogs of their own, and some are gardeners, and a few, a very few, are wizards prowling round on a holiday looking for something to do. This one was a wizard, the one that now walked into the story. He came wandering up a garden path in a ragged old coat, with an old pipe in his mouth, and an old green hat on his head. If Rover had not been so busy barking at the ball, he might have noticed the blue feather stuck in the back of the green hat, and then he would have suspected that the man was a wizard, as any other sensible little dog would, but he never saw the feather at all. When the old man stooped down to pick up the ball, he was thinking of turning it into an orange, or even a bone, or a piece of meat for Rover. Rover growled and said, "Put it down," without ever a please. Of course, the wizard, being a wizard, understood perfectly, and he answered back again, "Be quiet, silly," without ever a please. Then he put the ball in his pocket, just to tease the dog, and turned away. I am sorry to say that Rover immediately bit his trousers, and tore out quite a piece. Perhaps he also tore out a piece of the wizard. Anyway, the old man suddenly turned round very angry and shouted, "Idiot, go and be a toy." After that, the most peculiar things began to happen. Rover was only a little dog to begin with, but he suddenly felt very much smaller. The grass seemed to grow monstrously tall and wave far above his head, and a long way away through the grass, like the sun rising through the trees of a forest, he could see the huge yellow ball, where the wizard had thrown it down again. He heard the gate click as the old man went out, but he could not see him. He tried to bark, but only a little tiny noise came out, too small for ordinary people to hear, and I don't suppose even a dog would have noticed it. So small he had become that I am sure if a cat had come along just then, she would have thought Rover was a mouse and would have eaten him. Tinker would. Tinker was the large black cat that lived in the same house. At the very thought of Tinker, Rover began to feel thoroughly frightened. But cats were soon put right out of his mind. The garden around him suddenly vanished, and Rover felt himself whisked off. He didn't know where. When the rush was over, he found he was in the dark, lying against a lot of hard things, and there he lay, in a stuffy box by the feel of it, very uncomfortably for a long while. He had nothing to eat or drink, but worst of all, he found he could not move. At first he thought this was because he was packed so tight, but afterwards he discovered that in the daytime he could only move very little and with great effort, and then only when no one was looking. Only after midnight could he walk and wag his tail, and a bit stiffly at that. He had become a toy, and because he had not said please to the wizard, now all day long he had to sit up and beg. He was fixed like that. After what seemed a very long, dark time, he tried once more to bark loud enough to make people hear. Then he tried to bite the other things in the box with him, stupid little toy animals, really, only made of wood or lead, not enchanted real dogs like Rover. But it was no good, he could not bark or bite. Suddenly, someone came and took off the lid of the box and let in the light. "We had better put a few of these animals in a window this morning, Harry," said a voice, and a hand came into the box. "Where did this one come from?" said the voice, and as the hand took hold of Rover. "I don't remember seeing this one before. It's no business in the threepenny box, I'm sure. Did you ever see anything so real looking? Look at its fur and its eyes." "Mark him sixpence," said Harry, and put him in the front of the window. There, in the front of the window, in the hot sun, poor little Rover had to sit all the morning, and all the afternoon, till nearly tea time, and all the while he had to sit up and pretend to beg, though really in his inside he was very angry indeed. "I'll run away from the very first people that buy me," he said to the other toys. "I'm real, I'm not a toy, and I won't be a toy. But I wish someone would come and buy me quick. I hate this shop, and I can't move all stuck up in a window like this." "What do you want to move for?" said the other toys. "We don't. It's more comfortable standing still thinking of nothing. The more you rest, the longer you live, so just shut up. We can't sleep while you're talking, and these are hard times and rough nurseries in front for some of us." They would not say any more, so poor Rover had no one to talk to at all, and he was very miserable, and very sorry he had bitten the wizard's trousers. I could not say it was the wizard or not who sent the mother to take the little dog away from the shop. Anyway, Just when Rover was feeling the miserablest, in the shop she walked with his shopping basket. She had seen Rover through the window and thought, what a nice little dog, he would be perfect for her boy. She had 3 boys, and one was particularly fond of little dogs, especially of little black and white dogs. So she bought Rover, and he was screwed up in paper and put in her basket among the things she had been buying for tea. Rover soon managed to wriggle his head out of the paper. He smelt cake, but he found he could not get at it, and right down there among the paper bags he growled a little toy growl. Only the shrimps heard him, and they asked him what was the matter. He told them all about it and expected them to be very sorry for him, but they only said, "How would you like to be boiled? Have you ever been boiled?" "No, I have never been boiled, as far as I remember," said Rover, "though I have sometimes been bathed, and it's not particularly nice, but I expect boiling isn't half as bad as being bewitched." "Then you have certainly never been boiled," they answered. "You know nothing about it. It's the very worst thing that could happen to anyone. We are still red with rage at the very idea." Rover did not like the shrimps, so he said, "Never mind. They will soon eat you up, and I shall sit and watch them." After that, the shrimps had no more to say to him. He was left to lie and wonder what sort of people had bought him. He soon found out. He was carried to a house, and the basket was set down on a table, and all the parcels were taken out. The shrimps were taken off to the larder, but Rover was given straight away to the little boy he had been bought for, who took him into the nursery and talked to him. Rover would have liked the little boy if he had not been too angry to listen what he was saying to him. The little boy barked at him in the best dog language he could manage. He was rather good at it, but Rover never tried to answer. All the time he was thinking he had said he would run away from the first people that bought him, and he was wondering how he could do it, and all the time he had to sit up and pretend to beg, while the little boy patted him and pushed him about over the table and along the floor. At last, night came, and the little boy went to bed, and Rover was put on a chair by the bedside, still begging until it was quite dark. The blind was down, but outside the moon rose up out of the sea, and laid the silver path across the waters. That is the way to places at the edge of the world, and far beyond, for those that can walk on it. The father and mother and the 3 little boys lived close by the sea, in a white house that looked right out over the waves to nowhere. When the little boys were asleep, Rover stretched his tired, stiff legs and gave a little bark that nobody heard except an old wicked spider up a corner. Then he jumped from the chair to the bed, and from the bed he tumbled off onto the carpet, and then he ran away out of the room and down the stairs and all over the house. Although he was very pleased to be able to move again, and having once been real and properly alive, he could jump and run a good deal better than most toys at night. He found it very difficult and dangerous getting about. He was so small that going downstairs was almost like jumping off walls, and getting upstairs again was very tiring and awkward indeed. And it was all no use. He found all the doors shut and locked, of course, and there was not a crack or a hole by which he could creep out, so poor Rover could not run away that night. And morning found a very tired little dog sitting up and pretending to beg on the chair, just where he had been left. The 2 older boys used to get up, when it was fine, and run along the sands before their breakfast. That morning when they woke and pulled up the blind, they saw the sun jumping out of the sea, all fiery red with clouds above his head, as if he had had a cold bath and was drying himself with towels. They were soon up and dressed, and off they went down the cliff and onto the shore for a walk, and Rover went with them. Just as little boy 2, to whom Rover belonged, was leaving the bedroom, he saw Rover sitting on the chest of drawers where he had put him while he was dressing. "He is begging to go out," he said, and put him in his trouser pocket. But Rover was not begging to go out, and certainly not in a trouser pocket. He wanted to rest and get ready for the night again, for he thought that this time he might find a way out and escape, and wander away and away until he came back to his home and his garden and his yellow ball on the lawn. He had a sort of idea that if once he could get back to the lawn, it might come all right. The enchantment might break, or he might wake up and find that it had all been a dream. So as the little boys scrambled down the cliff path and galloped along the sands, he tried to bark and struggle and wriggle in the pocket. Try how he could only move a very little, even though he was hidden and no one could see him. Still, he did what he could, and luck helped him. There was a handkerchief in the pocket, all crumpled and bundled up, so that Rover was not very deep down, and what with his efforts and the galloping of his master, before long he had managed to poke out his nose and have a sniff around. Very surprised he was, too. at what he smelt and what he saw. He had never either seen nor smelt the sea before, and the country village where he had been born was miles and miles from sound or snuff of it. Suddenly, as he was leaning out, a great big bird, all white and gray, went sweeping by just over the heads of the boys, making a noise like a great cat on wings. Rover was so startled that he fell right out of the pocket onto the soft sand, and no one heard him. The great bird flew on and away, never noticing his tiny barks, and the little boy walked on and on along the sands and never thought about him at all. At first, Rover was very pleased with himself. I've run away, he barked, toy barking that only other toys could have heard, and there were none to listen. Then he rolled over and lay in the clean, dry sand that was still cool from lying out all night under the stairs. But when the little boys went by on their way home and never noticed him, and he was left all alone on the empty shore, he was not quite so pleased. The shore was deserted except by the gulls. Besides the marks of their claws on the sand, the only other footprints to be seen were the tracks of the little boy's feet. That morning they had gone for their walk on a very lonely part of the beach that they seldom visited. Indeed, it was not often that anyone went there, for though the sand was clean and yellow, and the shingle white, and the sea blue with silver foam in a little cove under the gray cliffs, there was a queer feeling there, except just at early morning when the sun was new. People said that strange things came there, sometimes even in the afternoon, and by the evening the place was full of mermen and mermaidens. Not to speak of the smaller sea goblins that rode their small seahorses with bridles of green weed right up to the cliffs and left them lying in the foam at the edge of the water. Now, the reason of all the queerness was simple. The oldest of all the sand sorcerers lived in that combe. Somethists, as the Say people call him to their splashing language. Samathides was this one's name, or so he said, and a great fuss he made about the proper pronunciation. But he was a wise old thing, and all sorts of strange folk came to see him, for he was an excellent magician and very kindly to the right people. Into the bargain, it was a bit crusty on the surface. The merfolk used to laugh over his jokes for weeks after one of his midnight parties, but it was not easy to find him in the daytime. He liked to lie buried in the warm sand when the sun was shining, so that not more than the tip of one of his long ears stuck out. And even if both of his ears were showing, most people like you and me would have taken them for bits of stick. It is possible that old Samathos knew all about Rover. He certainly knew the old wizard who had enchanted him, for magicians and wizards are few and far between, and they know one another very well, and keep an eye on one another's doings too, not always being the best of friends in private life. At any rate, there was Rover lying in the soft sand and beginning to feel very lonely and rather queer, and there was Samathos, though Rover did not see him, peeping at him out of a pile of sand that the mermaids had made for him the night before. But the sand sorcerer said nothing, and Rover said nothing, and breakfast time went by, and the sun got high and hot. Rover looked at the sea, which sounded cool, and then he got a horrible fright. At first, he thought that the sand must have got into his eyes, but soon he saw that there could be no mistake. The sea was moving nearer and nearer, and swallowing up more and more sand, and the waves were getting bigger and bigger, and more foamy all the time. The tide was coming in, and Rover was lying just below the high water mark. But he did not know anything about that. He grew more and more terrified as he watched, and the thoughts of the splashing waves coming right up to the cliffs and washing him away into the foaming sea, far worse than any soapy bathing tub, still miserably begging. That is indeed what might have happened to him, but it did not. I dare say Samathos had something to do with it. At any rate, I imagine that the wizard's spell was not so strong in the queer cove, so close to the residence of another magician. Certainly, when the sea had come very near and Rover was nearly bursting with fright, as he struggled to roll a bit further up the beach, he suddenly found he could not move. His size was not changed, but he was no longer a toy. He could move quickly and properly with all his legs, daytime though it still was. He need not beg any more, and he could run over the sands where they were harder, and he could bark, not toy barks, but real, sharp, little fairy dog barks equal to his fairy dog size. He was so delighted, and he barked so loud that if you had been there, you would have heard him then, clear and far away like the echo of a sheepdog coming down the wind in the hills. And then the sand sorcerer suddenly stuck his head out of the sand. He certainly was ugly, and about as big as a very large dog. But to Rover, in his enchanted size, he looked hideous and monstrous. Rover sat down and stopped barking at once. "What are you making such a noise about, little dog?" said Psamathe Psamathides. "This is time for sleep." As a matter of fact, all times were times for him to go to sleep, unless something was going on which amused him, such as a dance of the mermaids in the cove, at his invitation. In that case, he got out of the sand and sat on a rock to see the fun. Mermaids may be very graceful in the water, but when they tried to dance on their tails on the shore, Psamathe thought them comical. "This is my time for sleep," he said again, when Rover did not answer. Still, Rover said nothing, and only wagged his tail apologetically. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "I am Psamathe Psamathides, the chief of all the Psamathists." He said this several times, very proudly, pronouncing every letter, and with every P he blew a cloud of sand down his nose. Rover was nearly buried in it, and he sat there looking so frightened and so unhappy that the sand sorcerer took pity on him. In fact, he suddenly stopped looking fierce and burst out laughing. "You are a funny little dog, little dog. Indeed, don't remember ever having seen another little dog that was quite such a little dog, little dog." And then he laughed again, and after that he suddenly looked solemn. "Have you been having any quarrels with wizards lately?" he asked, almost in a whisper, and he shut one eye and looked so friendly and so knowing out of the other one that Rover told him all about it. It was probably quite unnecessary, for Psamathe, as I told you, probably knew about it beforehand, but Rover felt all the better for talking to someone who appeared to understand and had more sense than mere toys. "It was a wizard, all right," said the sorcerer when Rover had finished his tale. "Old Artaxerxes. I should think from your description. He comes from Persia, but he lost his way one day, as even the best wizards sometimes do, unless they always stay at home like me. And the first person he met on the road went and put him on the way to Pershore Island. He has lived in those parts, except on holidays, ever since. They say he is a nimble plum-gatherer for an old man, 2,000, if he is a day, and extremely fond of cider. But that's neither here nor there," by which Psamathe meant that he was getting away from what he wanted to say. "The point is, what can I do for you?" "I don't know," said Rover. "Do you want to go home? I'm afraid I can't make you your proper size, at least not without asking Artaxerxes' permission first, as I don't want to quarrel with him at the moment. But I think I might venture to send you home. After all, Artaxerxes can always send you back again if he wants to. Though, of course, he might send you somewhere much worse than a toy shop next time if he was really annoyed." Rover did not like the sound of this at all, and he ventured to say that if he went back home so small, he might not be recognized, except by Tinker the cat, and he did not very much want to be recognized by Tinker in his present state. "Very well," said Psamathe. "We must think of something else. In the meantime, as you are real again, would you like something to eat?" Before Rover had time to say, "Yes, please, yes, please," there appeared on the sands in front of him a little plate with bread and gravy, and 2 tiny bones of just the right size, and a little drinking bowl full of water with "Drink, puppy, drink" written around it in small blue letters. He ate and drank all there was before he asked, "How did you do that? Thank you." He suddenly thought of adding the thank you, as wizards and people of that sort seemed rather touchy folk. Psamathe only smiled, so Rover lay down on the hot sand and went to sleep, and dreamed of bones and of chasing cats up plum trees, only to see them change into wizards with green hats who threw enormous plums like marrows at him. And the wind blew gently all the time and buried him almost over his head in blown sand. That is why the little boys never found him, although they came down into the cove specially to look for him. As soon as Little Boy 2 found he was lost, their father was with them this time. And when they had looked and looked till the sun began to get low and tea-time-ish, he took them back home and would not stay any longer. He knew too many queer things about that place. Little Boy 2 had to be content for some time after that with an ordinary 3-penny toy dog from the same shop, but somehow, though he had only had him for such a short while, he did not forget his little begging dog. At the moment, however, you can think of him sitting down very mournful to his tea without any dog at all, for while far away inland the old lady who had kept Rover and spoiled him, when he was an ordinary proper-sized animal, was just writing out an advertisement for a lost puppy, white with black ears and answers to the name of Rover, and while Rover himself slept away on the sands, and Psamathe dozed close by with his short arms folded on his fat tummy.